It's finally here. Skip straight to my thoughts, go to this time here. And for full-length courses, go to Groove 3. I did a Massive X tips and tricks last week or so. So it should be live by now. Just go to Groove 3. It has all the courses you need. But anyway, what is Massive X and why is it a big deal? Let me tell you a story. Years and years ago, before Serum, there was Massive. And it was massive. It was the synth. You could argue Serum is still the synth right now. It's the most popular and the best. But before this, there was Massive. For the 5 or 6 years before Serum, Massive was it. Massive was the synth. You could almost argue it defined a whole generation of sounds. Early dubstep, bro step, and even lots of drum and bass. And in fact, anything aggressive almost certainly used Massive. It doesn't just make aggressive sounds, but it was the easiest to use. If you wanted to make an aggressive bass, you used Massive, especially if you wanted to modulate it. It introduced this thing called Performer, so you could literally draw in with very quickly and easily different modulation shapes. It was a game changer. It was everything. It really was everything. Just like Serum, it's a wavetable synth. These are the wavetables here. And you move through the wavetables with these guys. Let me show you 2 of them. Ah, nostalgia. What an era-defining sound that is. Modern talking. Alongside Scrapyard. So it wasn't just Performer or how easily you could drag and drop modulation, comparatively new at the time, but it was also the wavetables. The wavetables are incredible. In fact, I'd almost argue the wavetables in the original Massive are better than in Serum even. In fact, I'd say they were the best collection of factory wavetables of any synth, and that still might be the case. That's maybe more of a creative taste. So let's not say that as fact, but I think it's true. No, you can actually get these wavetables for Serum. So if you want the massive wavetables, well, as you can see here, you can download them off the interwebs and then load them into Serum. Not quite sure who made them or how, but you can basically use the original massive wavetables in Serum if you like. It's a thing you can do by typing it into the interwebs, massive wavetables, Serum. But as I say, Massive was the synth. It's what everybody used. It kickstarted genres, it kickstarted careers, it kickstarted my career with packs like this. And so, the sequel, Massive X. Not Massive 2, Massive X. I've had it for a month or so now, and as you can see, I've already spent hundreds of hours with this thing. The beta version, which apparently is the same as the launch version. It's a beta, so it's not the final version, but they said it kind of was. All that should really change between the beta and the launch is some of the names, fixing typos and so on, such as this on the initial wavetable, typo on the initial wavetable. That happened. Anyway, the feature set's the same as launch, and they may add more presets, in fact, so I'm not going to comment on the number of presets or how good they are. I don't know what they're going to do with wavetables. In this beta version, there's all of these, lots of which are great, but have currently anyway a finite number of them. Maybe in the future you'll be able to import wavetables, like in Serum, Ableton, Icarus, and other ones too. In fact, quite a lot of wavetable synths now allow you to import, but currently that's not an option. Don't know what features they'll add, but they will, they always do, and there are some rumors about it, but we don't know specifically what features will be implemented. You're watching this in the future, or you'll be watching this in the future, but if you're watching this way in the future, you might be able to import wavetables now. Hopefully you can. As wavetables, the building blocks, the things you start with, the foundations. Start with the wavetable, manipulate it with the filter, maybe do some cool feedback routing and stuff, but you kind of need a good wavetable to start with. It's the heart of the sound, for the most part. Anyway, before the review, let's familiarize your eyes to help you see what's going on. These are the oscillators, the wavetable oscillators. These are the filters. These are the noise oscillators. These are the insert effects. These are the global effects. We have the voicing section, the routing section. More about that soon. It's one of the best. In fact, it may even be the best bit about Massive X. And of course, the modulation sources. Quite a lot of them, in fact. Note, you can change them between envelopes and LFOs. Also, Gorilla Mode, one of the wavetable modes, which, just like warp modes in Serum, taking a wavetable and manipulating it. Art's good too. And the format one, they're all very, very good. But anyway, what do I actually think? Is it good? Is it bad? Who's it good for? Who's it bad for? And for overall thoughts, go to this time here. Let's start with the good. The routing. Or you can, yes. 10 out of 10. And it's not just the ease of use, it's the options you have, such as feedback, feeding things back into the system any way you like, or doing filter modulation. So you can use an oscillator to modulate a filter. Just route the oscillator into this FM filter frequency modulation. Oh, I do like that. That's a whole realm of sounds that you can't do in many other ways. Similarly with feedback, you can just place it any way you like. Putting, say, a track delay, so a time delay, in the feedback circuitry. Syncing up this delay time to phase, oscillator phase. So this feedback works tonally. Again, opening up a whole range of sounds you just can't do in any other way. These are the things to explore if you want to stand out with your sound design. And you can even do things like routing envelopes into filters. Not modulating a filter with an envelope, but simply sending the envelope in via this mod source. Again, creating whole types of sounds you just can't make in any other way. For more information about this, do see my Groove 3 course. The new Performer is incredible. It's like Serum Lfos plus Ana 2 G envelopes, but with all this additional features. It takes a bit of time to get used to it, but once you do, it may be the most powerful modulation source of any synth. It's got all the normal stuff, drawing in steps, drawing in curves, syncing to the grid, moving sections, and so on. But you have things like the stretching option, not to mention it's bigger and longer than in Serum, so you can do longer, more complicated stuff, or even just longer, simpler stuff. Oh, and you can see through the Performers. Can you see through it? So you can line up your modulation sources, similar to envelopes in Serum, how you can see through the envelopes in Serum, but you can't see through the LFOs in Serum, which is unfortunate, but you can in Performer, in Massive X. It's really excellent, as are the factory noises. In fact, I'd say they're the best factory noises of any synth. Again, hopefully in future, we can import noises like other synths. But for now, you probably don't need to. The only category it doesn't have are attacks. For example, in Serum, we have these attacks. You don't currently have that in Massive X, unless it's changed between the launch and the beta version. But for all the other types of noise, the noises are incredible. They really are incredible. So much so, I actually want to resample them so I can use them as audio samples for other reasons. But yes, excellent. Tick for that too. Very good. Also, the reverbs are nice. You can choose many different types, just like in Icarus 2. And some of the filters are good. Creak, for example. Similar to Scream in the original Massive, but different options and better, in my opinion. Think of them as low-pass filters, but with all these saturated bits in, so it's bursting with character and ness, or ness. Not as many filters as I would like, but we'll come back to that. Furthermore, in the good category, these guys here for LFOs. In fact, also for delays, the ability to choose 5 different ones, and then you can just hop between them with this guy, either manually choosing between one of the 5, say, rates that work, or you could assign it to a macro, or even modulate it. This is actually a big deal, and I really wish more synths did this. As let's do Imagination Land. Let's say we have a wobbly wobble wobble wub 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 wub. We have a wub wub, and we want to say modulate between 3 different wub speeds, and we only want to move between these 3 speeds. Normally, you'd have to draw this in with automation or get super precise with your levels with a different modulation source, which was fiddly. But with here, you can just choose the different speeds and move through them without having to move through the ones you don't like. It's a simple idea, but super effective. And again, I wish more synths did this. But now, time for some bad news. Starting with the main issue with this. The lack of visual feedback. There's some visual feedback. On the wavetable here, it's better than nothing, I suppose. Performer's got great visual feedback. That's just the tracking modulator. But everything else doesn't. For example, look at the envelopes here. And now look at the envelopes in the original massive. I have no words. That doesn't make any sense at all. There must be a reason. Don't get me wrong, developing plugins is hard, and I don't really know how hard it is to do that visual feedback stuff. Probably very difficult, but it works for Performer. They can do it in Performer, so why not for the envelopes? But multiplier, I know what ADSR is. Isn't visual feedback just for people that are learning who say don't know what ADSR is? No. No, it's not. I know what ADSR, and they've drawn a little diagram, and that's helpful. These other two diagrams weren't helpful. I honestly couldn't figure out what they meant. I actually had to run tests to work out what these other diagrams meant because the diagrams weren't helpful. But let's go back to the normal ones. I know what ADSR is, but when you're designing sounds, visual feedback helps. Visual feedback helps you work faster. Imagine you're making a sound and you have envelope 2 assigned to something, but you can't remember what it's doing. You go, I want to change envelope 2 or work out what it's doing. Let's take a look. Click. With visual feedback, you'd know instantly. You could see, like in Massive here, is it plucky? Is it long attack? Short attack? Is it sustained? Is it a more typical ADSR shape? Does it have a looping section or whatever it is? Usually it's as simple as, is it plucky or is it not plucky? So I can work out what's happening. With visual feedback, you instantly know. Without visual feedback, you have to work it out. Yes, it doesn't take long. You glance at A, you glance at D, you glance at S, and you piece it together. Takes a few seconds, but takes a few seconds. And all those thinking thoughts take time and slow you down, and oftentimes get in the way of the creative process. When I'm designing sounds, I want to work fast. I have an idea, I want to try it, bing, bang, bong. I don't want to have to try and work out what's happening and sort of keep a mental model in my head of what's happening. As without visual feedback, that's what you have to do. Without visual feedback, you have to keep this mental model in your head of how everything's configured. Not to mention some of the controls just aren't obvious. Shape, for example. Once you learn that the left looks like this and the right looks like that, once you learn that, it's fine. You know when to move it one way or the other. But until you do, you have to run tests. And that just seems silly when you could just have the visual feedback. Like in the previous Massive or lots of other synths. Circle 2, for example. And again, even once you learn it, not seeing it visually slows you down. As it therefore means every time you check on it, you need to sort of glance at shape. Where is it? And you have to process how will that change the shape of what's going on. And as a result of this, I don't think as many people will use this new exciter envelope as they should. This new exciter envelope's great. It's interesting and useful to have this as a dedicated thing, but it's really not clear what's going on until you learn it. And then you have to use it regularly to remember what each parameter does, in my opinion. Also things like modulation. Great to see those rings, to see how far it's modulating. That's better than lots of synths. But I love a tiny dot. Like in Serum, you can see the dot to see where the parameter actually is. I'd love to see this in Massive X. Hopefully they can do it, but again, I don't know how difficult that is to do. That might be very difficult to program in, so that's setting the bar quite high as an expectation. Furthermore, on the visual feedback front, take a look at these LFOs and the shapes. The switcher looks cool, visually pleasing as a thing to look at, but the little drawings are too small. Look how small they are. The shapes, they're so tiny. I have to zoom in my eyes by going to the screen to see what's going on oftentimes. Actually, that's not true. Once you've learnt them, you don't have to look as hard, but when you first use it, you have to look quite hard. And I don't quite understand why, because there's all this space. They allocated a huge area, as they should, to LFOs, but they've made the shapes sort of tiny little things. And as a result, when I first started using it, I just didn't really know what was going on. I almost didn't use the LFOs as much. I was using Performer and shortening the loop to make my own lengths, but more about custom LFO shapes in my Groove 3 course. Back to LFOs, there's some very clever logic as to how it moves from one shape to the next. It makes perfect sense, but why not make the shapes bigger so people can see this? And again, at a glance, know what's going on. Or why not actually turn it into more of a performer type thing instead of it being like this? That makes sense if you look at the diagrams, just allow you to manipulate it. Or you can use Performer. Also, visually, sometimes things grey out, like here, when not in use, it greys out. And it'd be cool if the oscillators did that too, just like in Serum. When an oscillator or a filter is not in use, it greys out. And so, at a glance, you know what's happening. When you've got a preset, you can, at a glance, work out what you need to look at. Again, it's not a huge deal, but it's the thought process involved. When I look at Massive X now, I have to do some brain work. It's not much, it takes a few seconds. I can sort of, oh yeah, the noise oscillator level is pulled down to 0, therefore it's probably not in use. It isn't in use. But if it was grayed out, I wouldn't have to worry about that. Similarly, with the filter, I'd rather it grayed out. But I mean, with the filter, you can just bypass it, so maybe that's the intent. Turning into a list of feature suggestions, maybe I should do that separately. The dark mode would be cool too, and again, it's not just for fun, it's not just for visuals. Dark mode's best in a dark room, light mode's best in a light room. Right now, it's light outside. Light, light, therefore, best for the eyes to have a light skin. But if I was at nighttime in the darkness, better for the eyes to have a dark skin. That's why various synths have light and dark skins, like this. Anyway, it's a brand new product to be fair, so maybe I shouldn't expect that. In a lot of these plugins, light and dark modes was a newer feature added, so maybe I shouldn't expect that. Again, more of a feature suggestion. But the bad news, Unison, well, it's not bad, but it's not excellent. It's quite simple. Personally, I feel like the future of synths should give you options, like in Icarus, choosing between various Unison types, or even Serum to some extent. As Unison is such a huge part of most sounds, I want options for how the movement happens. The default's great, so maybe that's not a big deal actually. And the ability to just pull in the width, again, that's something more synths should have. But I'm thinking about the future of synths, and I think the future's options. Do I want crazy movement or more subtle movement? More filters would be nice too. There's a few great ones. I'd say these ones are great, in my opinion. Some of those, I think, completely unique to Massive X. So again, could be a reason alone to get it. But the best 2, 3, or 4 wavetable synths in the world have a few more options. So it'd be great to see more options here. That's a key part of wavetable synthesis. Start with the wavetable and filter it. It's a key part of subtractive wavetable synthesis. That's what subtractive means in synthesis. Subtracting, so you take a thing and subtract. Take the wavetable and subtract. Subtract with a filter. So the more filter types you have, the better. These ones are very cool though, so I shouldn't necessarily call that negative. It's more just different wavetable synths have different filters, which are interesting. And Massive X has some great ones, so that's good. And I think that wraps up all the bad stuff, or the feature suggestions, I suppose, might be a nice way of looking at it. But multiplier, you haven't mentioned 2 things that are bad news. What about the fact there's only one filter, or there's no sub-oscillator? That's not bad news, because that's not an issue at all. Let me explain. So, the sub-oscillator, you may be thinking, multiplier, there's only 2 main oscillators now. In Massive, there was 3. And I often use one as a sub. That's not an issue, because in Massive X you have insert oscillators. So use one of these insert effects as the sub-oscillator. Choose insert oscillator. So if you wanted, you could actually have 5 oscillators. The insert oscillators are a bit more limited to these waveforms here, but you have 3 insert effects, and so therefore 3 additional oscillators. Normally you'd use one as the sub, routing it out separately, either into the effects or bypassing the effects, into the filter or not into the filter, so it's actually better. I'm not sure how obvious that is to a new person synthesizing sounds, but no, it's a thing. Similarly with the filters, so there's one main filter, but there are these correction filters in the insert effects. The name might have changed. They mentioned they're going to change the names between the beta and launch, so it's maybe called something else now, but you only usually need more than one filter for correcting stuff. Maybe you want to high pass filter the noise oscillator. You can do that with this insert effect as a high pass. Maybe you just want to shape the tone. You can do that with the insert effect. Think of the main filter as the main filter, the main interesting filter that does the main interesting thing. And you don't normally have 2 of them. That's why in Serum there's only 1, 2, but you don't have the routing options in Serum, so it's nicer in Massive X in this case. The routing really is special, and I hope we see this in more plugins, not even just synths, just plugins in general. I don't know how hard that is to program. Might be simple, might be difficult, probably difficult, but it's once you start using routing, it's bumped into the chair slightly. Once you start using routing, it's hard to go back. It's so much nicer using routing. Oh, it's excellent. And so, in conclusion, my final thoughts. Who should get this synth? Who shouldn't? Who's it good for? Who's it not as good for? Who's it sort of middly for? Actually, if you have skipped here, see the final thoughts, but then go back and see my reasons as to why. And so, quite simply, is this better than Serum? No. If you can only have one synth, I'd still recommend Serum. If you can have more than one synth, that's when you should consider this. If you're brand new to synthesis and learning, again, choose something like Serum. When you're learning, visual feedback's critical. Saying that though, if you can have more than one synth, consider Massive X. It's one of the best in the world. If there are 5 or 6 best synths, Massive X is one of them. Each of those being slightly different, some advantages, some disadvantages, each making its own types of sounds. So in each of those best 5 or 6 synths, there'll be some sounds you can make in it that you can't make in anything else. And that's exactly the case here. There are some sounds in Massive X you just can't make in any other way. And that's why it's special. Focus on that. Focus on the positives. Don't look at the handful of things that are imperfect. Every synth is imperfect to one extent or another. Focus on the ways this is unique, such as the routing and all the other stuff I mentioned. Rewind to the bits in the video where I said all the good stuff. They're very good. There's lots in this that get me very excited and that are pushing synths forward. So focus on that. Years in the making. Years in the making. Massive X. Interesting to see where it'll end up, because they'll be adding new features, but we don't know what those features are. That's important to know too. These will evolve. I wonder where it's going.